In 1984, Geraldine Ferraro was the first woman to run on a major political party's presidential ticket. Astronaut Bruce McCandless made the first untethered spacewalk, and the idea of an organization that would eventually become Arohi first began to take root.
Hello and greetings to Arohi members, supporters, and friends. My name is Harriet Service and I retired in 2000 from the USC Emeriti Center. Now that seems to be a long time ago, yet a marker for me to signify the golden opportunity that I was given to serve for 17 years with the first three directors of the USC Emeriti Center, James Peterson, Tillman Hall, and then Paul Hadley. When I began working in the Emeriti Center, the director, James Peterson, and a faculty retiree, Arnold Small, were in the process of evaluating the results of a 1984 Mail survey to 100 public and private colleges and universities. The survey was inquiring whether their campus had any formal organization or center that was focusing on retired persons or their interests. And the results revealed that there was only about 1/4 of the campuses that had any office that was dedicated to retirees. So these results set in motion the realization that college and university retirees needed to be given an opportunity to stay connected with their campus and their colleagues. So as a result of that survey, USC hosted the first what we called Conference on Retirement in Colleges and Universities with 10 schools attending. The enthusiasm and the desire to expand were obvious, and the participation of the leaders from UCLA, Berkeley, UC San Diego State, Washington State, and other campuses who joined in the meetings in 86, 87, and 88. It became known as the West Coast Conference on Retirement in Colleges and Universities. And then later in 1989, the University of Washington hosted the 5th conference with 22 schools attending, with also a representation from Canada. It was agreed then that an effort needed to be made to encourage more campuses to participate beyond the West Coast. Well, Purdue University had been contacted in Lafayette, Indiana, and they had agreed to host a meeting, but low enrollment and enthusiasm just resulted in the cancellation of that conference. So efforts stalled for a few years, but in 96 and 97, interest was revived, with a few meetings in Ashland, Oregon, and conference attendees still expressed an interest in expanding beyond the West Coast. So, a group of original planners made reservations to gather for a 1998 conference aboard the cruise ship Royal Caribbean Legend of the Seas. As you can imagine, that was not a college campus, but a week-long retreat for eager planners to gather, focus, communicate, and view the Alaskan scenery. We were refreshed and continued our request to expand. As I recall, there were about 15 or 20 attendees and a few roommates and spouses who were not involved in the daily meetings at that time, and the active participants were from Washington, Oregon, and the California campuses. We met in the lower deck conference rooms and enjoyed meals together in the ship's main dining room. The conference was structured as a general discussion of how our campus retiree organization have been progressing and ways to further develop of what would later become Arohi. The cruise ship conference thought came about with a few years prior when my husband and I were on another cruise, and we noticed that there was a conference group on board. And the ship was gathering in the conference rooms in the lower decks, and I acquired into the possibility of a future gathering, and the idea took hold. So for us, the cruise ship conference was an attractive, easy fix. All attendees made their own reservations, which included, of course, their room and meals, plus entertainment on board. So the campus retirement conferences continued then when North Carolina State hosted a meeting in 2000 under the leadership of Tom Elliman. The idea of a multi-campus organization was agreed upon with the purpose of providing a forum for the discussion of all aspects of retirement in higher education. The idea of Arohi was launched, and Paul Hadley, then director of the USC Emeriti Center, was chosen as its organizing president. The USC Staff Retirement Association and the Retired Faculty Association continue their support of Arohi with our leader, Jeanette Brown, who is now the Assistant Vice Provost for the USC Emeriti Center. My long association with the Emeriti Center and Arohi has been very pleasant, and I do continue. However, I will not be in attendance at this Arohi conference in September. So I hope that my presence here on this presentation will make up for my absence, and I hope I will all meet you again some year. Thank you.
My name is Eddie Murphy. I was the director of the UCLA Emeriti Retiree Relations Center for 17 years. And so I was very much involved in Arohi. I don't exactly remember the particular year, but I know that we convened a group of us at USC. Dr. Hadley, Paul Hadley, called that meeting. I do know my predecessor, Marion Broom, she had conversations with people from USC, and they sort of talked about getting together various university and retiree organizations. I did find that file, so I know there were talks, and maybe the beginning prior to my involvement with Dr. Hadley, but he convened a group of us. I don't recollect exactly who was in the meeting, the original meeting with Dr. Hadley, but I suspect that Harriet Service and Betty Redmond, I think perhaps Pat Doherty, and maybe Shelley Glazer. At one point in time, we were all together, but I don't know if they were in that initial meeting. Dr. Hadley was a prince of a man, and he had a passion for bringing his thought of various universities and retiree organizations together. He was very passionate about that. I was struck by his passion, but also by the person who he was. There was no big I and little you. He wanted to have our thoughts about how we should proceed. And I remember there was a whole conversation about what the name should be. And some people were calling it Arohi, other people were pronouncing it differently. We had a lot of fun with that, as I recall. But Dr. Hadley inspired me greatly personally. And so this was his baby, if you will. And I was pleased and honored to come alongside and encourage him in his beautiful idea of collaborating with other retiree organizations. So why reinvent the wheel when you've done something that I can copy? And so that was my initial introduction to Arohi. I'm considered, I believe, a founding member of UCLA, representing UCLA, but that was our beginning. And Betty Redmond and I became very, very close. She was the director of USC at the time. And when she stepped down, Jeanette Brown came in, and we furthered the mission. Betty never was far away from us of moving Arohi forward. And of course, Shelley Glazer from Berkeley, UC Berkeley.
When Paul Hadley was interviewed about his career at USC as part of the Emeriti Center's Video History Project, he envisioned a retirement quite different from what came to pass in just a few years. His thoughts about retirement are typical for most academic retirees: reading, writing, traveling, and spending time with family. The reality is often quite different for retirees who are deeply connected to their institutions.
Well then, Dr. Hadley, as must come to all men and women, retirement came to you in 1981. We'd be interested to know how a man who was so immersed here, how he now spends his energy.
Actually, adjustment is no great problem. The temptation is to retire too much. So I'm working 2 days a week as stated clerk of the Presbytery. That's the administrative arm of the Presbyterian Church in the area of San Fernando. That gets me up in the morning and gives me some feeling of administrative place in the world. I've visited 5 different universities as the chairman of an accreditation team. I've done a little traveling for continuing education and some reading. All those years of administration, there wasn't much time for reading. That's enough on top of newspapers and journals to keep me going.
Yeah.
And then Virginia and I have 2 lovely grandchildren of whom we are very proud, and it's nice to see them growing up.
So you're investing in the next generation.
With great pleasure.
With great pleasure.
Following the meeting in North Carolina, the original organizers began to plan a conference in earnest. The planning committee included Paul Hadley, Harriet Service, Susan Eklund, Shelley Glazer, Betty Redmond, and Eddie Murphy.
The first board was selected at a planning meeting in San Diego, and then there was a conference planning meeting here at USC for the meeting in Bloomington in October of 2003. Paul, as the first president, give us a little insight into the significance of the founding of this organization that we now know as AROHI.
Well, Harriet, we think it's important that retired faculty and staff be lifetime members and contributors to their own institutions. And as such, they comprise a valuable segment of higher education. And we think that that segment of higher education ought to have its institutional qualities, its national and international organization as a means of establishing and making permanent the relationships between retirees and their respective organizations.
The inaugural conference convened at Indiana University in October of 2002. In addition to a keynote address, panel presentations, and individual sessions, the committee included an AROHI organizing meeting for attendees to ask questions and offer suggestions for advancing AROHI's future.
My first recollection about an AROHI event after we had grounded ourselves was the conference. I believe it was the first conference. It was held in Los Angeles. USC and the Emeriti Center at USC basically funded that conference. Others of us came along and did our little piece, but they were the giant financially for that conference. My best recollection, beyond meeting people that I had never met before that conference, was that the opening minutes, Jeanette Brown and I walked out on the stage. She had on a USC sweatshirt, I had on a UCLA sweatshirt. And as most of you know, we're great rivals. And we said nothing, we just stood before the audience and the attendees. And there was this big uproar of laughter, and that's exactly what we were striving for. So that's my greatest memory. I also remember going out that night to dinner in Los Angeles with people that I had just met.
Following the 2002 meeting, Harriet Service, Paul Hadley, and others at the USC Emeriti Center began the process of completing the paperwork necessary to register as a nonprofit 501c3 organization. The identified charter officers were Paul Hadley, Jean Bianchi, Shelley Glazer, Harriet Service, and Norma Summersgill. The charter for the new organization also identified a charter board of directors listed here. The charter also identified the original member institutions. Together, the Board of Directors and list of institutions attending the first conference represents colleges, universities, and institutes from across North America and reflect a wide interest in joining together to represent the interests of higher education retirees. Early on, several businesses and corporations were willing to step up, become affiliate members, and support this new organization. Their contributions helped to fund the first few conferences and kept registration fees manageable. Concurrently, in 2002, a loose confederation of retirees associations in Canada came together at a conference in Toronto to reorganize and revitalize their association. The result was the College and University Retirees Associations of Canada, which shares similar goals with AROHE, connecting local retirees associations with each other, providing assistance to local organizations, and advocating for the concerns of retirees in higher education. At the 2002 conference, Peter Russell, a member of the steering committee of CURAC, was a panelist discussing multi-campus, multi-university partnerships. AROHE and CURAC have continued to collaborate closely on issues of mutual interest and concern.
Well, 20 years ago, I, out of the blue, got this call to go to Bloomington, Indiana, where they were forming an association of retirees in higher education. AROHE turned out to be the name of it. And I was recently the founder of an organization in Canada called CURAC, College and University Retirees Canada. There's a French version of that too, CURAC, C-U-R-A-C. And I thought I'd like to go to that. And so I turned up at Bloomington, and it was a fine meeting. I enjoyed all the folks there. And the first thing it made me realize that my Canadian organization was slow in getting formed. The United States retirees in higher education have been organizing for a lot longer than we had in Canada. And the other really interesting and important lesson I took away is retirees in higher education in the United States did some things, carried on some programs and activities that were beyond anything I'd ever thought of doing as a retiree leader in higher education in Canada. In other words, it opened our eyes, opened our minds to all kinds of activities, beginning at Bloomington itself, where there was a housing development for retirees, which the Retiree Association there had accomplished in partnership with the university. So I guess the other key point, I found I was the only attendant at the 2002 meeting who wasn't American. I gave it that touch, and it was only a touch of being an international organization, which the founders of AROHE really, really wanted to be international, which is a very fine aspiration, which they did achieve. So I gave it its first touch of internationalism.
Following the 2002 conference, Dr. Hadley began the application to establish AROHE as a California 501c3 nonprofit corporation and asked Betty Redmond to serve as its founding executive director. Betty then established the association office, wrote the bylaws, established legal and tax-exempt status, procured insurance, and developed a marketing plan, all as a volunteer. She served in that position until 2005.
Hello, I'm Betty Redmond, retired from the University of Southern California. I wish all of you could have known Paul Hadley, Emeritus Professor and former Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs at USC. I first met Paul when I interviewed to succeed him in 2000 as Executive Director of the USC Emeriti Center. Paul was such a kind and gentle man with a personality that made people want to associate with him. His concept for a national organization, his willingness to put in the effort to make it happen, and a well-established informal collaboration with university retiree groups led to an organizational meeting in 2001 to form a national, soon to become binational, organization, and the name Association of Retirement Organizations in Higher Education was adopted. You know, of particular note is the inclusive phrase retiree organizations. There's really no definition for, it was already obvious that there was no one model. We had representatives from associations or societies and or institutional units such as emeriti or retirement centers, each in some way serving retired faculty, staff, and or surviving spouses. And these academic units, they varied in autonomy and structure, with some organized under the auspices of academic affairs, others under human resources, and even others under development. It was decided that all models would be welcome, for our founding leaders recognized the value of diversity. And our name, the Association of Retirement Organizations in Higher Education, doesn't exactly roll off your tongue. So it automatically became AROHE, at least to those of us on the West Coast. Our East Coast colleagues, however, pronounced it with a more refined tone, ARO, suggesting that AROHE sounded like someone was gagging. That be as it may, AROHE seems to have stuck. Following the organizational meeting, Paul Hadley began the legal process of establishing AROHE as a California 501c3 nonprofit corporation. The USC Emeriti Center, with its existing staff and space, became, and still is, AROHE's corporate office. As executive director of the Emeriti Center from the fall of 2000 to 2005, I became, by default, the same for AROHE. My jobs for AROHE were to organize and oversee a functional corporate office, but more importantly, to finalize AROHE's legal status by writing bylaws, procuring tax-exempt status and insurance, and writing resolutions and gaining board approval for operating procedures and policies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In 2005, I retired from USC, and Dr. Jeanette Brown brilliantly succeeded me as executive director of both the USC Emeriti Center and AROHE. She's been a major force in making AROHE what it is today. The best part of being involved in AROHE is the friendships that I made with colleagues from other universities, particularly Shelley Glazer from UC Berkeley and Eddie Murphy from USC's crosstown rival, UCLA, a rivalry we ignored except for one weekend a year when USC played UCLA in football. Looking back at old records, I found this note to myself on a list of 17 pending resolutions before the board. Quote, "A successful person is one who can lay a firm foundation with the bricks that others throw at him or her." David Brinkley. I'm pleased to see Arohi thriving today and to have had a small part in laying its foundation. Happy anniversary.
In 2004, the Mars rover landed, Facebook appeared for the first time, and the Summer Olympics returned to Greece. 2003 and 2004 represent important years of development for Arohi as well. With the organization established and registered, thoughts turned to methods for expanding the membership and offering opportunities for retiree organizations to learn from the experiences of others. The Arohi motto, "To educate, to advocate, and to serve," reflects the focus of the early founders. In addition to planning a second conference in 2004, the officers were busily engaged in developing other methods for reaching and supporting retirees and retiree organizations. In 2004, the first Arohi website was launched, and the first newsletter, titled Arohi News, was published. In 2005, the Arohi Startup and Development Kit was created, and Arohi officers Shelley Glazer and Betty Redmond, along with Karen Robinson, composed a study on retirement centers on campuses that was published in Educational Gerontology. Also in 2004, the second Arohi conference was held in Nashville under the leadership of Eugene Bianchi, and featured an expansion of sponsors as well as connecting members and exploring ways to support retiree organizations. At this conference, the Paul Hadley Honorary Address was instituted and continued at every conference through 2014. The first address was titled Beyond Golden Pond, The Value of Retirement Organizations, given by John Keating, Chancellor of the University of Wisconsin at Parkside.
The second conference, as I recall, was in Nashville. And as I recall, we stayed at Lowe's. And Shelley Glazer was very much involved in making that happen. My highlight from that conference was that Vanderbilt found us very interesting, our organization, Arohi, very interesting, and wanted to know a little bit more. As I recall, they didn't even have a retirees organization, but they invited us to a meet and greet. And there was a group of us on a bus, maybe more than one bus, but I was sort of like the head person on the one bus of us that went over and got to be friends with or be introduced to the bus driver. And I had told him my name, and he took us, and then at the appointed time, we returned back to the hotel. And he referred to me as Michael a couple of times. And I finally said, "Who's Michael?" And he said, "Well, Michael Jackson, isn't that your name?" So he knew it was an African-American actor or celebrity. He had forgotten my name was Eddie Murphy. And we had great laughs about that for the entire conference.
In 2005, Jeanette Brown succeeded Betty Redmond as the executive director of the USC Emeriti Center, which included the duties of the Arohi executive director position. She served in that position until 2019, also as a volunteer. In 2006, the musical Mary Poppins closed after 2,619 performances. Twitter was launched, and number 2 Texas beat number 1 USC in the 92nd Rose Bowl. Also in 2005 and 6, working collaboratively and with a team of conference planners, outgoing President Gene Bianchi, who had served 2 terms as president, and incoming President Shelley Glazer, structured the third conference that highlighted new models for retirement. The conference was held in Tempe with trips to the campus and around town. The conference at Arizona State University featured a number of speakers who were influential in the development of Erohi, including Ken Klein from Valparaiso University, Tom Elliman from North Carolina State University, Peter Russell from Curac, Sue Lucky from Morehead State University, Eddie Murphy from UCLA, Bob Scales from the University of Southern California, Leonard Gordon from Arizona State University, and others.
The conference, as I recall, was in Tempe, and they had not the structure that I had at UCLA or Jeanette had at USC. And Jerry Frederick at that time was the new director at UC Irvine. And I remember us landing and we hit the ground running because there was not the infrastructure that we had in Los Angeles. And I remember us going to Staples and copying, and we were stapling programs, and it was fun. We worked together, we collaborated together as one unit to make this conference a success, and it indeed was a success. I believe at that time, if I'm not mistaken, also there was talk of attendees who attended that one who found those of us who had centers established, they were envious and wanted to know more. And that's what I remember coming out of that particular conference, the idea of other universities wrapping their arms around the evolution of a center on their campus.
I'm so pleased to be still around to give my personal congratulations to Erohi and all it's done. And as I've been doing the same thing with Curac in Canada. These are wonderful organizations, and they've taught me that retirement is really a new phase of life, that instead of being the end of the things you enjoy doing, is the beginning of a whole bunch of opportunities you never thought of. And that's what Erohi has been up to. Congratulations, Erohi, on what you've accomplished in 20 years, and I know you're going to do a heck of a lot more in the next 20 years. Thank you so much.
So it's quite interesting because the 20th anniversary of Orohi is more or less the same time as the 20th anniversary of Canadian College and University Retirees Associations of Canada, CURAC. So it's wonderful that both these organizations are celebrating their anniversaries at roughly the same time. And great congratulations to Orohi. I think it's a wonderful organization, does a great job, and kudos to everybody who's involved in it.